Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your archbishop of Banterbury, your chancellor of cheerfulness, yada, yada, yada. Of course, your existential Mr. Rogers, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I am Rob casting at you, you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity. Happy Boxing Day. I don't know what that is, but I know they celebrate it in the UK. I guess you box things, you take them back, I don't know. But I hope everyone had a wonderful Christmas day, whatever you did. In my mind, it's always Jewish Movie Day. I watched a couple of great things yesterday, including Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, based on the August Wilson play, and boy, did I love it. What performances. My God, what a beautifully made film. I had not seen the play. I knew I wanted to see the film. But Viola Davis, Chad Boseman, wow, there was, the performances are amazing, highly recommended. Just know going in, it is based on a play, and it is rather stage-bound, I would say. I mean, it's kind of a one-location, two-room movie that gets outside a bit, but quite enjoyed it. I highly recommend it. Now, as many of you know, I spend a lot of time thinking about storytelling. And what works, what doesn't work, and since specifically my area of interest is genre films, I mean, I like all drama. I like all great stories. But I spend a lot of time thinking about science fiction, fantasy, and horror. And what I think makes those stories believable. Now, for instance, one of my favorite comic books, if not my favorite comic book of all time, is Neil Gaiman's The Sandman, which its entire conceit is fantasy. The idea that when God created the universe, he created these entities, the family of the endless, death, dream, destruction, destiny, desire, delirium, delight, delight which became delirium. All of these things, those are complete fantasy conceits. There's no basis in reality at all. So it's not like I don't like total flights of fantasy. But that said, within the confines of the stories that Neil Gaiman is telling about the family of the endless, there are believable ways to tell those stories and ways that aren't so believable. And one of the things that fascinates me is how I feel that a lot of the franchises that I grew up with that used to tell stories that were sort of grounded in their own reality have spun off now and seem less than concerned with making me believe in the universes that I used to believe in. And I find that interesting. So I'm constantly asking myself, the question is, why? Why is this? And why are audiences, in my mind, especially greater fandom, why are there parts of fandom that more easily accept these kinds of stories? It seems to me that, I guess because there's a lot more people now who are fans of science fiction, fantasy, and horror. We live in, obviously, the post-geek singularity, where these fandoms are no longer relegated to just, big fans. They're much more mainstream. So the levels that people pay attention, or the levels of demand from the audience in terms of what they will believe in and what they won't believe in, has changed since I was growing up learning about these things. And my knowledge or education about these kinds of stories came from when I was very young. I started watching films. I mean, science fiction movies, obviously horror films, the classics. And the great thing about it was when I was younger, let's say 45 plus years ago, when I was actually watching and reading, when I began watching and reading, there was half the shit that exists now. So it was possible to actually see, at least when it came to movies or science fiction television, and to a certain extent comics, it was possible to get a pretty good overview of everything that existed. Now, clearly, there was a lot of comics I didn't read. There was a lot of science fiction books I still haven't read. But 45 years ago when I really, or even longer, when I started developing this intense interest in this material, there was a lot less as far as the genre was concerned. I mean, when you think about science fiction television up through the late 70s, they were all shows that really came out of the 60s. Twilight Zone, Outer Limits. Well, Twilight Zone actually started in the 50s and carried over into the 60s, but you had Star Trek and Outer Limits and Twilight Zone and the Irwin Allen Land of the Giants and Time Tunnel and Lost in Space. And then when you got into the 70s, not a whole lot. In the UK, they had the Jerry Anderson Supermarionation shows, which gave way to UFO in Space 1999. But it was possible to see pretty much everything. I mean, or at least develop a working knowledge of it all. It wasn't until later I think I was 12 or 13 when I first saw The Prisoner. But nowadays, the task to get a handle on all of it is daunting, to say the least. And considering more of it's being made now than ever before, over this weekend, yesterday, as a matter of fact, I finally caught up with For All Mankind, which is a series that I should have been watching from the very beginning, and I didn't. It debuted in November of 2019 on Apple Plus. Never watched it. I finally sat down. We have Apple Plus, and I binged 7 episodes of it. Quite loved it. At first, I was under the impression before I'd seen it, I'm like, well, why is anyone going to make an alternate history of the American space program when we know that the premise that the Russians beat us to the moon? I never understood why that was an effective premise. Didn't realize I'd become so engrossed in how they did a great job of jumping off with real people, like Deke Slayton being a main character in the series. And I realized that, this is kind of the way they wanted it to be. And I thought For All Mankind was excellent. I've quite enjoyed it. I'm not done with it yet, but I quite enjoyed it. And I felt that there was an authenticity. There was a lot of research that went in to For All Mankind to make not only their alternate history believable, but their space program believable. And the fact that they really offered fascinating looks at Wernher von Braun and how that could have been what happened to him. And it was very, very fascinating. But so I'm constantly learning. I feel like I'm putting myself through it, my own sort of PhD to sort of understand how to tell a great science fiction, fantasy, or horror story. That's sort of, if you ask me, what is the one constant in your life? I've been studying this kind of storytelling literally since I was a little kid. And I've been asking myself, and I have very specific tastes. For instance, my taste in horror skew more toward the real, The Exorcist, Rosemary's Baby, 2 of my favorite horror films. But on the other hand, I do like fantasy-oriented, I like dark fantasy. Hellraiser, for instance, the Hellraiser mythology, I very much like. I'm not so much interested in slasher films, I've seen them all pretty much, but they seem to be more one note to me. As far as a slasher film, I'd take Maniac any day of the week if you believe in Maniac as being a slasher movie, when I think it is. It's sort of the character examination of a serial killer, and it's quite effective. So I find myself drawn more toward a movie like Maniac than, say, Friday the 13th. Or I'll definitely watch the original French language Martyrs, which has a very interesting ending, almost poetic, than something else. And give me creature-based horror. I love An American Werewolf in London and The Howling and things like that. But it just depends. I have very specific tastes, which is different than, your mileage may vary, which is fine. Which brings me to Wonder Woman 84, which is a movie that I will flat out say left me very perplexed, especially coming on the heels of Patty Jenkins' Wonder Woman, which I very much enjoyed. I quite liked Wonder Woman, and of course, the villain in Wonder Woman winds up being Ares, the god of war, which is interesting considering I was watching For All Mankind and Wernher von Braun. But, Wonder Woman is a superhero franchise that has a lot of fantasy in it because of her origins as, well, being a daughter of Zeus, being an Amazonian, what do you ever want to call it. So the idea then that even though Wonder Woman has fantastical, definitely a fantasy background, they have chosen to present her so far very much steeped in the real world. When she leaves Themyscira and goes to the world of men in the original Wonder Woman, the fact that they chose to focus on World War I, where Wonder Woman was seeing the horrors of war, the war to end all wars, and they chose to go there. They took a fantasy character and dropped her into an environment that was relentlessly realistic, based on real historical events, and I thought that was a very interesting choice, and it definitely worked. And yes, it had a great big CGI battle at the end, which I can understand, but for as fantastical as Wonder Woman is, they really grounded it in a reality, a real human event, World War I, the trench warfare, the horrors of war, and they really did a good job both having fun with showing us Diana's first journey to man's world, and then yet dealing with the horrors of that world. I thought that was a really interesting choice, and it really worked for me. So based on that, I certainly was led to believe that Wonder Woman 1984 would be dealing with the year 1984 in some way, shape, or form in a similar fashion that they dealt with World War I. You know, the 1915 to 1920, that era of time, something around there. 1984 was very specific. So I was curious, and one of the things that I went into, the expectation that was set for me is, why 1984? Was it Orwellian? Obviously, the first thing, George Orwell's 1984, a very famous book that came out in that era. Was it just the era, Patrick Nagel paintings, music, fashion? But that seemed to me a little lightweight compared to the World War I set first film. So I was curious. I didn't know what it all was supposed to be. I know that they were going to show us Maxwell Lord, which is a character I've loved since he was introduced in Justice League International back in the 80s. I love that book. I love the characterization of Maxwell Lord. I thought Pedro Pascal was a little different than I pictured him, but I'm like, okay. So I was really, really curious about all of those things going into Wonder Woman 84. And then, of course, the return of Steve Trevor. How was that going to work? Was it time travel? How would that work? So before I get into that and how I felt about all this, I would like to read an article that I found from Longform. Brian Salvatore wrote this article on June 18th, 2013. And what I really liked about this article, as you will see, John Campy and I talk a lot about how we like Zack Snyder's Man of Steel, and there's a lot of people that don't. But I found this article, June 18th, 2013, so 7.5 years ago. And of course, this is about Zack Snyder's Man of Steel. And Zack Snyder was the person that gave us Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman. He cast her, he saw something in her, and he picked her as his definitive Wonder Woman. But I wanted to go back and I was looking for something else, but I found this and I want to share it. On Sunday night, I took in Man of Steel. I went in with low expectations, and except for a few really troubling scenes, I enjoyed it. However, one thing struck me during the film that really bugs me, and I've noticed it is endemic of just about every superhero film made in the last 2 decades. I fear that the recent trend of all superhero movies arcing towards realism is ultimately a very, very bad thing for these films. This has been a trend more or less since the mid-'80s, when superhero comics went through the most dramatic darkening of their tone with the 1-2 punch of Watchmen and The Dark Knight Returns. It started theatrically with 1989's Batman and has grown more extreme over the 24 years that has followed. Remember, this was our article's 2013. Batman was still pretty ridiculous. The setting looked more realistic, but the actions were still campy and weird. 3 words, love that Joker. But the past decade has been the most vigilant in terms of removing anything that couldn't feel absolutely authentic from the superhero genre. Now, this isn't to say that all of a sudden there are scientific explanations for Green Lantern rings, or that Asgard has been located on a map, it has now, and the powers of the gods verified. No, instead, these characters who are fantastical in nature have been dropped into as real a world as possible. For some characters, this works well. Batman, as a regular dude with a superhuman motivation, works well when placed in the real world. Others wind up losing so much of what made them special in the first place when they are homogenized into a more normal setting. Part of what gave the 1978 Superman charm was that Metropolis was a weird mishmash of the 40s and the 70s. Men wore hats to work, but people still shouted, "Hey, Jim, that's a bad outfit. Whoa," at men dressed in tights. Green Lantern tried to make a more movie-friendly parallax by making it a cloud instead of a giant yellow bug. The result was hilariously bad and managed to have neither the realism hoped for nor the lack of goofiness they thought a giant bug would bring. The stylized queens of Manhattan and Sam Raimi's Spider-Man popped off the screen in a way the gritty New York of The Amazing Spider-Man just didn't. The arc toward realism means a few different things, but the subtext is clear and confounding. Our world needs these heroes because we have no hope left. The more realistic the films get, the less hopeful they get as well. Call me a Pollyanna, but I don't think we live in a hopeless world. Realism on film oftentimes equals depressing and bleak, especially in less than gifted hands. Even already bleak properties get darker. The Punisher begat Punisher War Journal. Ang Lee's living comic Hulk was jettisoned for the safer and darker The Incredible Hulk. Eventually, the only chance filmmakers were making with their movies were just how dark to push it. For the love of Rao, even Superman Returns, a circle jerk of optimism and nostalgia, had to temper the colors of the Superman suit and make Lex Luthor get all stabby with a kryptonite shard. And yet, the Avengers and its direct predecessors somewhat refused this trope. That world never felt so unbearably bleak. Thor was a little darker in parts than it perhaps should have been, and I don't think an Iron Man film needs to necessarily have palladium poisoning and drunken dogfights to be effective, but overall, the Marvel Studios film have been a breath of fresh air in this department. Hell, in the Avengers, Tony Stark argues for the goodness of the world by talking about shawarma. You couldn't see anyone in an X-Men film have any such joyous exclamations, or anyone in a Bat film either, for that matter. Man of Steel features the most egregious version of this in its climax. If you've not seen Man of Steel yet, please skip this part. You'll know it's safe when you see a picture of the Fonz giving you the "spoilers are done, it's safe" thumbs up. Scroll now. Well, that's all I wanted to touch upon in this article. You can read the rest of it. I'm going to put it right here in the live chat, so you can read the rest if you want. But what I did think about that article is it kind of set the tone on what I was talking about. I've believed that the success of superhero films over the last 20 years, and yes, I understand movies like Blade and The Crow were comic book adaptations in the 90s that gave way to our current state of superhero movies, but I've always believed that what we really wanted as audience members is to believe that the superheroes that we're watching on screen exist concurrently in our world today. Like, our wish fulfillment fantasy about superheroes is that if we look out the window, that one day Superman might fly by, or Wonder Woman, or Tony Stark in his latest Iron Man armor will fly by, and that our superhero movies are about our world today. Certainly, as an avid reader of comic books for most of my life, I've often put, when I'm reading comic books, I'm like, okay, I read them as if they were happening in our world. And all the way back to the 70s, I remember getting reprints in the early 80s of the Denny O'Neil and, the Denny O'Neil Green Lantern, Green Arrow crossovers that he wrote, and with, of course, Neil Adams' artwork. And one of the covers was Green Lantern and Green Arrow walk in on Speedy, and Speedy has a heroin needle in his arm, and on the cover it says, "My ward Speedy is a junkie." And in this famous storyline, Green Arrow and Green Lantern travel across the United States to sort of see what's up. Now, I always liked those stories because it was really interesting to me to see how would that work in the real world. If there is a Green Lantern and a Green Arrow traveling the highways and byways of the land, maybe in Winnebago like Mentor and Billy Batson in the 70s Shazam TV show, but if they were really doing that, what would it be like for someone like Hal Jordan in his Green Lantern persona? What would it be like for him just like going into a diner and having a meal? He has to eat, right? And I mean, sure, he can go in his civilian outfit, regular. Some people don't know who he is, but I've always found that fascinating. And in terms of my own wish fulfillment, my own desire and love of comics, I've always read them as taking place in our world now. And I think one of the things about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, my own theory, one of the reasons is that it became as successful as it became is because starting out with the first Iron Man, Jon Favreau's Iron Man, is you believed it. Tony Stark seemed like a guy who could, in fact, exist in our world. Sure, was he larger than life? Absolutely. But similar enough to people that we know about, whether they're people like Elon Musk or even a Donald Trump figure from, say, the 80s. And some Steve Jobs, an industrialist that is flamboyant, that has changed the world through their technology. These people exist. So it's something that we have, there's something analogous in the real world that we can believe in and go, oh, yeah, that's what it's like. And I believe that the reason that, sure, is X-Men dark? Yes. But the first and second X-Men, obviously, Bryan Singer went to great pains to make the characters feel like you open a superhero movie at Auschwitz to create an instantaneous rapport for the audience. They understand Magneto. He was a kid whose parents were taken from him during the Holocaust, and that was a real event. And suddenly a supervillain like Magneto's motivations are steeped in his childhood trauma, much the same way that Batman's were. So you understand his motivation. You know, he's distrustful of humanity because it was humanity that stripped him of his parents and stripped him of his humanity when they put him in a concentration camp. And this is something that we as the audience, we get that. We're like, yep, I understand. Now, as this article pointed out, when I first saw Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, the first Spider-Man, one of the things that I didn't like about it was the New York City as depicted in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man was a movie version of New York City. It was not relentlessly realistic. And the same was true of Tim Burton's first Batman. The Gotham of Batman was still an Anton Furst designed dystopian nightmare of a city. I liked it, but they did go to great pains to make it. I mean, obviously we'd had Batman depicted in live action by Burt Ward and Adam West. Now you go forward to that was in Batman Returns, but you go to the Batman of Tim Burton's 89 Batman, and it's very different. More relentlessly realistic, yet fantasy and stylized. Nobody would mistake Tim Burton's Batman for taking place in the real world. And to a certain extent, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man didn't either. His 3 Spider-Man movies took place in movie world. And that was one of the reasons I felt, and of course Green Goblin was straight out of, a comic book, a fantasy character that wasn't as based in reality. So Sam Raimi was trying to do what Tim Burton was doing, is have your cake and eat it too. Make a comic book movie, but make it more realistic, more palatable to modern audiences. But at the same time, it's still a comic book movie. And then as we move forward, you had different kinds of things, the stylization of Daredevil and Elektra and Ghost Rider, and they were all varying degrees of realistic and things. So when the plot would happen, when the things would unfurl, sometimes you had a complete misfire like Catwoman, Pete Toft's Catwoman, where nothing really felt like it was the real world. And it then is, you're left up to the filmmakers and their discretion. What kind of a world are they going to show you? Obviously, Superman the movie is an interesting example because on one hand, like this article pointed out, it seems like it's an amalgamation of the 40s, like the old Superman serials, or even how they're portrayed in the 50s, The Adventures of Superman with George Reeves, and then the 70s as well. But then you have a villain, Gene Hackman, Miss Tessmacher, Otis. They're in an entirely different movie. There's a huge tonal shift in Superman the movie where you have the Smallville Americana scenes, and then you get into kind of, there's like this goofy His Girl Friday vibe to the Metropolis scenes, and then you're totally into some weird comedy with the villains. And all of this amalgamation of these different feels, it works, but the tonal shifts can be jarring, especially going back and watching the film now. But now we're in a world where realism seems to matter. And the first Wonder Woman did have, of course, a great big CG battle at the end, but the realism of it seemed to be a part of the franchise, judging as we saw introduced Batman v Superman, the character of Diana she felt in a way sad. She was tragically sad, but yet very powerful, and she had it going on. Apparently, she's been working at the Smithsonian now for decades. No one seems to notice that she's grown old, which is okay. So when I went into Wonder Woman 84, I had all of these expectations that were given to me by what I'd seen before from DC. Now, on the other hand, they also showed me Aquaman, and Aquaman was a complete balls-to-the-wall fantasy romp, and a very different feeling from the Aquaman we met in Justice League. I mean, full-on Ray Harryhausen dudes, Atlanteans riding armored sharks and giant seahorses. I mean, Aquaman just went for a Harryhausen dream of which I loved. I loved it. I loved what James Wan did with Aquaman, because what are you going to do? Try and make Atlantis relentlessly realistic and all the different undersea kingdoms that we're just unaware of? I mean, you're going into complete fantasy realms, and of course they have to still coexist with what Man of Steel and what the Batman in Batman v Superman has shown us, and that's really difficult. It's the same way that how do you make Asgard work with Tony Stark and Steve Rogers? And what I thought was really interesting about what they did with Asgard is they made it, Asgard's an alien planet, an alien place, and all of the quote-unquote magic is somehow technologically based. I mean, sure, the old Clark adage that something that's so technologically advanced just might appear to be magic to us, but at least they, without really explaining it away, you understand that, okay, the different realms that Asgard exists in, whether it's Midgard, Asgard, wherever, that these things are more like alien planets than anything else. So you can buy into that. And I think they did a marvelous job making the core Avengers team work together, and you could believe them in a universe. I think that was an amazing trick. So when I saw Wonder Woman 84, as I watched it unfurl, I watched it obviously on HBO Max. I did not go to the theaters. There's no theaters that are open here. I have to say, I was left very perplexed by Wonder Woman 84. Very, very perplexed. And now, clearly, the cue for Wonder Woman 84 they were taking was from the direction James Wan went in with Aquaman. In that, nope, let's go full-on fantasy. Let's go full-on, we'll have some kind of full-on fantasy conceit. Certainly it worked for Aquaman, and Wonder Woman is, I mean, come on, her dad's Zeus. So why not go full-on and embrace that fantasy? But the thing about Aquaman was he still had a father, Boba Fett, who lived on the shore. His mother was Atlantean. Nicole Kidman obviously came from Atlantis. And even Aquaman, before it went full-on fantasy, you still had some kind of grounding in the real world. Some kind. So I figured Wonder Woman 84 might go that route. Now, I found an article. I was looking like, what did people think of Wonder Woman 84? Like I was looking for various reviews and maybe things that would have marked my own thoughts about Wonder Woman 84. So I was trying to find a review from a female reviewer. I wanted to find a female reviewer, and I wanted to find a reviewer that was not necessarily from the United States. Something different. So I found a woman who wrote a review for the Hindustan Times in New Delhi, India. I figured that might be an interesting way to go about looking for this kind of a review. So why don't we delve into what she said about this? This is kind of, you know what, I this is kind of hard to read, so I'll just put myself back on here reading the review. And Sumya, I think it's Sumya Sumya Rivastava wrote this review for the Hindustan Times in New Delhi. Wonder Woman 1984 movie review. Gal Gadot's goddess-like charm barely saves a wonderless sequel. Judging from the title, there are two things that should have been the focus of Wonder Woman 1984. The Amazonian goddess and the 80s nostalgia that the film most likely wanted to cash in on. But somehow, neither is explored to their full potential. Wonder Woman, among the few actually interesting DC icons, had the good luck to find someone as perfect as Gal Gadot to wear the cuffs, yet even she could just barely save a largely soulless and wonderless film. Wonder Woman 84, a follow-up to 2017's Wonder Woman, which I still dub the best DCEU film to exist, leaves World War II in German trenches to land in Washington, D.C. of 1984. Diana Prince has assumed her position at the Smithsonian and has been spending her weekends saving joggers in pink tights from getting run over and local malls from getting robbed. Other than on the fashion, there is very little influence in the 1980s that have had on Wonder Woman 1984. Try hard as I might, I cannot recall hearing a single beat of synth in Hans Zimmer's gargantuan music, as we were so vehemently promised in the trailer a year ago. The music, especially the opening Themyscira theme, is more likely to transport you to the Shire and leave you there. With a needlessly long flashback opening sequence set in Diana's homeland, director Patty Jenkins establishes the moral lesson she will give to us this time. A young Diana, in a shorter, more Amazonian version of the Iron Man triathlon, learns that there is no honor in taking the short path to what you desire. Lying will get you nothing, and the truth shall always emerge as victorious. The lessons and the ideals crop up again in her life more than 60 years after she enters the human world. So I'm not going to get into the necessarily the plot mechanics. I'm going to talk about the plot a lot, but not necessarily all the various things that happen in the plot. But I wanted to talk about the central conceit of this movie. And first of all, Wonder Woman we saw in World War I. We've also seen her in Batman v Superman and in Justice League. So she exists in the past and the present in the DCEU. This is the first time we saw her kind of the middle ground between that past and the present. So what I was really interested in is, what has her journey in man's world been like? After her experience in World War I, well, she lived through World War II, she lived through Korea, she lived through Vietnam, she lived through the age of automobiles taking over, the industrialized age, the middle class being created, the civil rights movement, landing on the moon. There's a lot of stuff that has happened in human culture between World War I and 1984. None of that is dealt with. What did Wonder Woman do in World War II? No idea. The film doesn't have anything to do with that. And clearly in this movie, she's pining away still for Steve Trevor, her one true love. Her one true love that she met days after coming to man's world. And clearly after he died, that was his death was shown in Wonder Woman, the first one. Are you trying to tell me, and this movie tries to tell us this, that she's been leading a lonely, solitary existence since then, despite all of the history and the great historical things that have happened in the time since, well, we first saw her? The movie doesn't deal with any of that, which I found, I mean, man, I don't expect to see flashbacks necessarily of her life, but, I mean, it puts her in the situation that we've seen her in the present day, 35 years later, where she's still working in the same Smithsonian, or she's still dealing with artifacts in the same way. It was very interesting, okay? And then I thought to myself, all right, well, why the 1984 setting? What is it about 1984 aside from the Orwellian idea of that? Well, so what happened in 1984? So I kind of looked it up. Indira Gandhi was murdered. The UK and China agreed on Hong Kong. Poison gas escapes from the Union Carbide factories in Bhopal, India, killing thousands of people. And it goes on. AIDS breaks out. What were the hit songs of 1984? Well, at least in America. Owner of a Lonely Heart, Karma Chameleon, Jump, Footloose, Against All Odds, Hello, Let's Hear It for the Boy, Time After Time by Cyndi Lauper, The Reflex, Duran Duran, and of course, When Doves Cry, Prince. Now, kudos to the movie for using Frankie Goes to Hollywood's Welcome to the Pleasure Dome, which I have to say, I use that film in my own movie, Free Enterprise. I'm a huge fan of Trevor Horn and that particular song. And of course, that album did come out in October of 1984, later 1984, but it came out in 84. So I believe that at some big party event, they might be playing that particular record. But one of the things I was very disappointed by in the movie was the 1984 that's depicted in Wonder Woman 84 is a movie version of 1984. Everything was cliche. It's watch anything set in the 80s, flashback movies, or even movies that were made of the period, and we were definitely seeing movie world 1984. This was Sam Raimi's New York, but transposed to Washington, D.C., where you walk out of a museum, and of course there's break dancers right outside the door breaking, and yet we really didn't hear any real recognizable hip-hop of that time. Certainly if you were a fan of the movie, say, Wild Style or something, it was an opportunity for the movie to throw in a real deep cut of some great hip-hop tune of 84. We don't get any of that in the film, which was very disappointing to me. I was very disappointed as someone who lived through the 80s. We didn't get, I mean, even the punk rockers that are depicted are the most extreme form. The ones that have mohawks, they have giant mohawks. There was no, as you would say, verisimilitude. It was all this stylized version of the 80s. But the thing that really bothered me the most about Wonder Woman 1984, all of that, is the movie really wasn't about Wonder Woman. The central conceit of the story, and once you get into this, I'm like, Wonder Woman, the first Wonder Woman, Patty Jenkins' first Wonder Woman, is squarely all about Wonder Woman's experience of the world that she's in. You see her make the journey. Of course, we meet her with Steve Trevor, and we go away from Wonder Woman for a lot of the time, but for the most part, it's Wonder Woman's story. Well, this Wonder Woman has much more, it felt, you know what, to be honest, it felt like a mid-90s, it felt like Batman Forever, or even there's a lot of Batman Returns in terms of the Catwoman story, but less developed. Than Barbara Minerva's story in this was less developed than, of course, Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman character. But the movie's not about Wonder Woman. I mean, of course, she's in it, obviously, but the central conceit of the film is really it's a byproduct as far as it relates to her. And I think what I missed about this Wonder Woman movie the most is that Wonder Woman was not necessarily the central protagonist of this film. Pedro Pascal is, and his journey is really the villain's journey is the focus of this movie. But what I really had a problem with, the biggest conceit, was the idea this movie is about wishes and wishes being granted. And the conceit of the movie is that there is a rock that was conceived, or maybe a crystal grew around it, but there's almost a bracelet that was forged by a mischievous god. The implication it was the devil, but you don't really know, that grants wishes. And whatever this thing is, whenever it's wound up, it's destroyed the civilizations that it's been bequeathed to. The last time we have a record of it was in the Mayan civilization. And of course, the Mayans disappeared very quickly. So the insinuation is that this thing is one of the most dangerous things in the world. And what it does is it grants wishes. It might as well have been a genie's magic lamp. And Maxwell Lord, the character of Maxwell Lord, plays a reality TV. He's basically like he has those half-an-hour programs on TV where you can invest in his bogus oil companies. He's had wells, they're all dry, and everything he's been telling people is a bunch of BS. and he's about to be ruined. He's about to be destroyed. And he has a young son his young son is Asian. Now, we never meet his mother. So that was, I guess you just assume that his mother was Asian. But the idea that he had a son, that it was odd. I mean, I understand the idea of inclusion and all that. And perhaps I shouldn't have wondered. But it is glaring. You're like, okay, well, what is his mother? The whole time I'm thinking, what does his mother look like? Where is his mother? You know, if you're going to do that, I guess that's just my old-fashioned sensibilities kicking in. But if you're making a statement, you know, you chose to cast the movie this way, and the question is, you're asking yourself, what does his mom look like? If she's Asian, is she Filipino? Is she Chinese, Korean, Japanese? Where is she from? And that was something that became distracting for me. I guess not a big deal, but also it's a big part of the story about a father seeking the love of his son. But once this all gets rip-roaring, the fantasy conceit of wishes, for me, went too far. I know, in a movie where you have a half Greek goddess, a demigod essentially, from the Amazon culture on Themyscira, and she's, you know, how can you say, Rob, that wishes are too much? Well, I've talked a lot on this show about the Japanese, the original Ringu, and then its remake, The Ring, and how in that film it's absolutely ridiculous what happens in that movie. And to recap, you have an evil female villain, Sadako in the Japanese version and Samara in the American remake, and the conceit is at some point she's a evil child, or because she was abused or whatever, she has projected these images from her subconscious on a videotape. And if you watch this videotape, she knows she's somewhere in the ether. She died. She fell down a well and died. She's in the afterlife waiting for someone to watch a videotape as if it's like ding, 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 ding in the afterlife. And then she calls you on the phone and says, 7 days. And then I guess she starts a clock. And then when 7 days are up, she comes for you. I mean, if you think about the plot of The Ring, it's completely ridiculous. But you don't think about it when you're watching it. You buy into it. You're like, all right, this is just how it works. And that's what good science fiction, fantasy, and horror does. It makes you believe, and you don't sit there and ask yourself, well, if that's true, then this is true too. Well, in this movie, literally the whole plot centers around be careful what you wish for, because you may get it. That whole idea, which we've seen in how many movies where somebody gets 3 wishes, Aladdin or any other franchise. Whenever there's wishes involved, it always can go awry. And there was a Scottish proverb. It's actually a nursery rhyme. If wishes were horses, beggars would ride. I would wear one by my side, and if ifs and ands were pots and pans, a tinker would never work. Or, if ifs and ands were pots and pans, there surely be dishes to do. And this was first recorded in the Remains of Greater Work Concerning Britain, published by William Camden in 1551 to 1623. If wishes were thrushes, beggars would eat, was the first version of the proverb. And that was published in Scottish Proverbs, collected and arranged by James Kelly in 1721. But the idea, there's also a Deep Space Nine episode. It was the 16th episode of the first season of Deep Space Nine called If Wishes Were Horses. It's not a very good episode of Deep Space Nine, but the idea meaning if wishes were horses, beggars would ride. If you could make a wish, even the poorest of us would get what they wanted. There would be a price. But here's the thing. In this movie, in the Wonder Woman that we've already seen in Batman v Superman, in Justice League, in Patty Jenkins' first Wonder Woman, to go into Wonder Woman 84, any semblance of creating anything that was happening in the real world, in the Reagan 80s when AIDS was breaking out and we had the Cold War was still raging, anything like that was dispensed with in this film. And I had a real problem with it. Like I couldn't, And then as the plot gets rolling with this magical God-wishing thing, this rock, bracelet, whatever you want to call it, the idea of wishes being granted. Like, in this film, I think I need to read something else. I found another review, and this is the last thing I'll read that I wanted to share with you. Because I found this also to be interesting. And it really sort of, it really, it sort of encapsulated how I felt about the movie. And it's from filmfreakcentral.net. And, not necessarily, I'm not saying that this is the only review to read, but there's a lot in here that I wanted to touch on that I think this review does a good review of it. Walter Chaw wrote this. And here's what it is. He gave it 1.5 stars out of 4. At some point, someone in some boardroom should have pushed away from the table and asked whether it was a good idea to have a subplot in their new Wonder Woman movie about a person in the Middle East wishing that colonizers would be expelled from occupied territories, the granting of said wish subsequently leading somehow to nuclear holocaust. I mean, with or without an Israeli actress in the lead role. Not to say it's not geometrically worse with an Israeli actress in the lead role, because it is. Look, the real wonder of Wonder Woman 84 is that this maybe isn't the worst thing about it. Neither is how flat it looks, or how it starts with 45 minutes of poorly timed slapstick before shifting into absolutely deadening action sequences, a weird body possession intrigue, and a horrifying message about how you should never wish for things because everything has consequences attached to it. With so much riding on its shoulders, the burden to be all things to all people has resulted in a vivisected monstrosity of plastic inauthenticity. Wonder Woman 84 additionally has one of the most beautiful people in the world, who's playing an immortal superhero, tearfully proclaim that she wants something to go right for her for once in her life. What I'm saying is, Wonder Woman 84 is a very, very particular, very limited kind of fantasy gratification that also happens to have fantasy gratification as its needlessly magical plot. Wonder Woman, Gal Gadot, goes around doing good deeds in plain sight. Weird how Batman has to do a lot of Dark Knight detecting to find her in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. One of the good deeds she does is break up a mall heist ripped from the storyboards for The Goonies, involving an artifact that grants wishes. It's not a monkey's paw, surprisingly enough, although Wonder Woman does reference the Wonder Woman Jacob story, the WW Jacob story, when she lectures someone about being careful what they wish for. The artifact is satanic, I think. Wonder Woman 84 declines to come right out and say so. Wonder Woman is content instead to read the ancient cuneiform to the surprise of her colleague, who seems to not know she's good at her job at the Smithsonian, clasp her hands to her mouth and inform boyfriend Steve Trevor that this ancient script tells of how a god created this artifact, but everything else it grants, it takes something from you. The god of lies, Steve, the god of lies. If you're wondering how Steve, who died at the end of the first film 60-plus movie years prior, is alive again, it's because Wonder Woman wished that he would come back to life. And instead of granting that wish, the artifact has Steve possess some poor schlub. The artifact is also an asshole. Better would be for Steve to come back as a reanimated corpse or a house cat, but this raises questions about what happens to Steve's host when Steve inhabits him. They're not questions that Wonder Woman 84 bothers to answer, and they're not questions that Wonder Woman and Steve think to ask, even though they're supposed to be good people. If I wake up tomorrow in someone else's body, the first thing I'd want to know is, well, what the fuck happened to the person I just murdered and supplanted? That Wonder Woman 84 appears in the same year as Possessor and Freaky further clarifies how empty it is, how morally bankrupt and thunk by committee it is to its core. Later, his body returned to him. The host is hit on hard by Wonder Woman and doesn't respond to her at all, thus undermining a semi-clever, early if bloated gag about how, when Wonder Woman shows up at a party, every single dude there is into her. Wonder Woman 84 can't decide what kind of feminist it is. Is the measure of a good man the one who will not ask Gal Gadot out on a date when Gal Gadot tells him he looks good and has great taste in clothes? Consider the case of Barbara Minerva, Kristen Wiig, the timid gemologist at the Smithsonian, who has the temerity to wish for the confidence and self-possession of her co-worker, Diana Prince, unaware that Diana happens to be Wonder Woman. Mousy McFrumpsalot, you know your fucking place. Wonder Woman teaches Barbara her place by almost drowning her while forcing Barbara to renounce her wish not to be crippled by self-loathing. She could have said that Barbara can have that without having superpowers and perfect bone structure, too, but she doesn't. I don't know if Wonder Woman actually knows that. Maxwell Lord, the really bad guy in this movie, is a reality TV star who wants to be president. Where do they come up with this stuff? There's something about how the media can control people's minds and play a major role in destroying the world. Amazing work all around. Maxwell gets a hold of the artifact, and for his first wish, wishes that he were the artifact, which is some real Jewel of the Nile shit, am I right? His dream is to be the most powerful man in the world, and so he goes around getting people to wish things on him, so he can then wish things in return from them. Eventually, he visits the 1984 POTUS, Stuart Milligan, who looks nothing like Ronald Reagan, and so is not trying to approximate Reagan, that I thought he was just some guy who wished he were president, and poof. I thought there was some guy who wished he were president, poof, and there he is. But no, I think he's supposed to be Reagan, who wishes he had more nuclear weapons. And this is funny because Reagan was a demented ballsack so unhinged, the Soviets prepared a first strike strategy to jump ahead of the Armageddon. Wonder Woman later laments to Maxwell how his world was a lovely place before he showed up and started granting wishes. Was it, though? In 1984, we were all afraid we were going to die in nuclear fire. Thousands had already perished from a mysterious new disease the Reagan administration declined to address because it only seemed to affect gay people. How many of the wishes that shouldn't have been made in Wonder Woman 84 were for an AIDS cure? Not every wish is selfish. I bet the guy Steve possesses so Wonder Woman can get her groove back after nearly a 7-decade drought wishes he had his life back. The joke is that Reagan wants more nukes because, as his buddy Maggie famously said, nuclear superiority is the best way to keep the peace. But seriously, folks, 1984 was beautiful, except for anyone really who wasn't on par physically, economically, with the likes of Wonder Woman and Steve. I have more questions. I want to know why the prologue, there's this entire flashback to Themyscira about not cheating during a tournament that looks like Cirque du Soleil with a scoreboard. It can't have been to set up the moral of the story, the truth being beauty and beauty truth, and that's all you need to know. Probably that's the only moral because the instructions printed on the artifact, it's a truism someone once posted was found engraved on a Grecian urn. Probably that's the moral because in the earlier draft of the screenplay it had poetry in it. I want to know why Chris Pine's entire performance here is to look surprised, or how a 152-minute movie fails to build any memorable characters. And you know you're in trouble when watching nothing less than the literal end of the world doesn't raise the blood pressure. Almost more than anything else, I'm curious why this was set in 1984, unless it was just for the shoulder pads and the jazzercise sight gags. After the first 12 hours of this ordeal, the filmmakers abandoned those altogether. Did anyone notice that the aide yelling expository softballs in the Oval Office is a black woman? More nukes? How? Or that the policeman on the street screaming into his walkie, lamenting about Wonder Woman not helping and them being in trouble, is black? There's a point at which inclusion in supporting roles, implemented without a plan, backfires spectacularly. Did I mention that Maxwell has an Asian son? I don't know why. I do know that between this and The Midnight Sky, there's apparently no upper limit to the number of deadbeat dad redemption arcs in production. Now I'm going to put the rest of this, which is worth reading, into the live chat. So the question I have for all of you, bringing it back to my original commentary about what makes these things real. What do you believe? Now, going back to The Ring and this movie, if you ask, since this reviewer brought it up, if you ask for your homeland to be free of infidels and restored to the way it was back, presumably, 1,000 years ago, which is what happens in this movie, when this wish is asked for, in the movie, these gigantic walls magically appear, walling off this Middle Eastern country. Now, as I'm watching this, I'm thinking to myself, all right, like Samara or Sadako in The Ring, is the Loki-esque or the devil himself, is he presiding over these wishes? Like, what are the actual physical mechanics. Since you're showing me, it's not like somebody's wishing for $1 million and somehow there's $1 million or $1 billion in their bank account somewhere. You're now showing me gigantic physical manifestations of these wishes in the world. Now, as an astute viewer, I'm asking myself, well, who made that decision? Like, those walls never existed back in the day, certainly walls that weren't that high. They've never existed. So it's not like when he was asking for his homeland to be restored the way it used to be, that was something that was in his own mind. So what he was really wishing for was he was wishing for his version of his homeland, which is, his wish. But there's a decision made, a mechanical decision, a physical and mechanical decision made of this ginormous wall that suddenly is created, literally stranding people. You saw a car up on top of the wall. It was cut roadways in half. And my first question as I'm watching this, I'm like, how does that work? Like, okay, this thing has been imbued with the power of granting wishes, but it made a decision to build a physical wall, which has there's a physical response there. How did that work? Who made that particular decision? Like, what intelligence, because there has to be some kind of intelligence, because it understands, it's if you tell this thing, not only does it understand the language you're speaking in, but it also figures out a way to do these things, to grant your wish by building, say, 1,000-foot walls around an entire country. And that has physical ramifications. And I know, call me nuts, but I'm watching this film and I'm like, you need to make me believe the same way that Iron Man made me believe in Tony Stark's tech, or Doctor Strange made me believe, well, maybe not, did not such a great job of making me believe but I went with it. But if you're going to go that route, I need to remain tethered into some kind of reality for this movie to work. And for instance, when someone says, well, I want to be famous, as somebody does say in the movie, a girl says, I want to be famous. And the manifestation of that is showing people outside that suddenly passersby are looking inside the window going, look who it is, as if that's fame. I mean, if I said in my mind, well, I would like to be famous, I would like to be walking down the red carpet with my lady in my hand, going in to see a movie that I had written, produced, directed, and edited that was considered the greatest film of all time, and all the paparazzi are taking my picture, and everyone's going, oh my God, Rob Burnett has created this incredible, amazing movie. It wouldn't satisfy me if suddenly people are at the window pointing, going, look, it's Rob Burnett. And maybe you could chalk that up to the fact that, well, as the monkey's paw tells us, be careful what you wish for. But this movie doesn't really do any of that, because everybody kind of gets what they want. It's just that when you have a planet full of people all wishing for things, disaster ensues. I mean, we do see nuclear weapons launched in this film. The Cold War turns into a very hot war. But now what's interesting is this movie wants to have its cake and eat it too. And what I thought as I'm looking at this film, I didn't understand the mechanics of the wishing. I know that seems strange to say, but when you're trying to make me believe and make your audience believe in your plot, like, I believe that in Aquaman that there are giant kingdoms under the water in our oceans, because we don't really know what's in our oceans deep down at the bottom. You know, how many people have gone down to the bottom of the Marianas Trench? I mean, James Cameron did. But so in our minds, it's like, okay, we can believe that there's a race of beings that live in the oceans that have camouflaged their existence. That's an ask. If you're going to ask somebody to believe in a fantasy conceit, I'll buy into that. Knowing what we know and how it's any scientist worth their salt would tell you, we just haven't explored much of the ocean floor. And knowing that alone, I'm like, okay, you want to tell me that Atlantean civilizations and others, that Gaiman Hansu's fishmen and fish women, the Sleestack looking underwater people. You want to tell me that I'll go there with you. I'll be like, okay, I buy into that. But when you start saying to me that wishes come true, and I'm like, okay, but are there limitations to these wishes? And clearly we see, why is it that only one guy changed the geography of the planet? Like, why didn't someone say, I want to be king of the world and I want to live on the top of Mount Everest? Maybe somebody did. But can you imagine and so the flaws of this film for me narratively start to unravel when people start making these kinds of wishes, because then, like when you rub a genie, when a lamp, you rub a magic lamp and the genie comes out, you're dealing with the genie. I know this is so weird and esoteric to think about, but the genie makes the decisions. If you ask the genie's like, well, you've got however many wishes. The genie's filtering your wishes through his or her or its intellect. Like, you know what's up. You know that there's a genie there, and the genie knows better than you do. So if you ask the genie to fulfill a wish for you, you know that the genie's like, be careful what you wish for. But in this case, all bets are off. And yet this is the most powerful device. Not only can it grant you wishes, it can grant everybody on the earth wishes as well. And the plot kind of goes from there. But for me, the movie became completely untethered from reality because they were never consistent with how these wishes work. I mean, we see, as far as Diana Prince's, she basically says under her breath, she's thinking about Steve Trevor. She never actually says, boy, I sure wish that Steve Trevor was back from the dead and living with me in the here and the now. And also we see what happens when she does do this unknowing. She doesn't know that she's made this wish that's going to become real. We see that Steve Trevor possesses the body of another person. Well, they never get into the mechanics of that, but you're supposed to be like, okay, well, that apparently is how this wish worked. But why then would he possess that guy and not that guy? Why is he a handsome, like Steve Trevor, there's a guy that's just as handsome as Chris Pine, whose body Chris Pine possesses. Why wouldn't Steve Trevor in any other movie, like if you're making another movie, why wouldn't Steve Trevor inhabit the body of somebody who's, I don't know, 65 years old? Or a different race? Or a different, like, why does he come back as a frog or something? Why does Steve Trevor, as far as Diana is concerned, and she's made this wish, she hasn't even seen this dude. Like, she doesn't know who this dude is, you know, and so I'm asking myself, well, wait a minute, how does that work? And then, of course, Barbara Minerva says, I want to be like Diana, not knowing she's Wonder Woman. But in saying that, when she says, I wish I was that person. So the God granting the wish, or however the mechanics work, Barbara Minerva, who's asking for this wish, she doesn't know Diana Prince is Wonder Woman. So in her wish, in her mind's eye, she couldn't possibly know that she's an Amazon. What she's wishing to be is an Amazonian. All she wants is the beauty and the self-confidence and the put-togetherness of what Diana Prince has. But yet the wisher, the wishing machine, let's call it the wishing machine, knows that she's Amazonian, so instills or imbues Barbara Minerva with not only Diana's self-confidence, but with the fact that she's a Amazonian. But I'm thinking to myself as an astute viewer, I'm going, no, wait a minute, brah. I don't care what kind of a god you are. How do you know that when Barbara Minerva makes her wish, how do you know that I guess you suddenly examine, do you do a forensic examination on Diana Prince so then you're allowed to, oh, well, I've discovered she's an Amazon. So what you're really asking for, even though that's not what Barbara Minerva was asking for, she was asking to be self-confident, not so nebbishy, and able to walk in high heels without tripping. She was not asking to be an Amazonian. That was something that was, oh, be careful what you wish for. And as I'm watching this movie, these are the things that are going through my mind. I'm like, wait a minute. You filmmakers have not done a sufficient job to make me understand the ramifications of this wishing machine that you've created. How does it really work? It doesn't seem like it works the same way for each person. And I found that to be frustrating from a a certain point well, as an astute viewer of science fiction, fantasy, and horror. I'm trying to follow along. Now, what I would have thought would have been more interesting is, in a time travel story, if somebody goes back in the past to change something that happened, like change the fact that Steve Trevor dies, so you get Steve Trevor back. Well, in a lot of time travel stories, the world goes to shit because you've disrupted the space-time continuum, and in a way, she wishes for Steve Trevor to come back. I think it would have been a much more interesting thing where if she wished for Steve Trevor to come back, she doesn't really even know she did it, because why would she? Why would she think that her wish would come true? And she never questions it. He's just there. Wouldn't the first thing that Diana would say is like, you shouldn't be here. This is wrong. Something's fucked up. Let's go fix it. But no, they bed down together. They hang out. She takes him to the Air and Space Museum to presumably because they have planes fueled up and ready to go, but whatever. I mean, there were so many things in this movie that my suspension of disbelief and my desire to have verisimilitude were out the window. But what bothered me the most was this idea, the mechanics of these wishes. And they didn't think it through. And they were just, however the plot needed them to behave, they would. And that really bothered me. If the authors of these properties don't understand how Hellraiser, the lament configuration, you have that puzzle box. Well, like Frank Cotton, you are unsatisfied with your life, and you know that summoning those Cenobites, you're going to have an experience. They'll tear your soul apart that you can't have otherwise. But you have to open it yourself. They do play around with that. I mean, it does open when the Cenobites want to talk to Chrissy on its own, but for the most part, in order for the lament configuration to happen, the whole point is that it's you're the one summoning the Cenobites. They don't just show up to wreak havoc and wreck shop on your body. They have to be summoned, because the whole point is that the hellbound heart that the story is based on, that's what it's called. That's it. It has to be in your heart. If you want to go to hell and you want to meet the Cenobites or the Leviathan or whatever, it has to be in your heart. We don't just show up. And that's what makes Hellraiser and the mythos interesting, because we have something we can believe in. Now, I know people are going to laugh. I have the same problem with the whatever caused the burn in Star Trek Discovery was so unbelievably, ridiculously stupid. And I couldn't believe that they even, and what's really even more so, okay, they find the cause of the burn. Do they think that, it's all magic. It becomes magic. And their cause for the burn has no basis in any kind of reality. I'm like, I tune out. I mean, Star Trek Discovery always tunes me out anyway, but I'm like, how can you expect any discerning fan of science fiction, who's, in my case, been reading science fiction my whole life and watching great science fiction, and what you've done is you've, like the rest of Star Trek Discovery, which doesn't know the difference between science fiction and fantasy, you've completely given me the most ludicrous, ridiculous, fantastical, you might as well be, even at Hogwarts, you have to go to school to learn magic. But when I'm watching this, man, I'm like, Wonder Woman, what are you doing? What is this magical conceit? And it spins, it goes off the rails. And I got to the point where, okay, I'm watching this and I like the actors and I like what's going on, but there's a million different things going in a million different directions. You could have done like Steve Trevor brings up, the monkey's paw story. If everyone knows that story, it's basically be careful what you wish for. You do one thing, and other things change. It makes me hark back to one of my favorite science fiction films of all time. Is a little scene movie, because it's very hard to see, called The Lathe of Heaven. No, not the version that was done with James Caan, but the original Kevin Conway and Bruce Davidson version that was done for PBS television back in 1979. Essentially, it's the same thing. People are wishing, or they have dreams about the way they want the world to be, and it changes the world around those dreams. They have effective dreams, and you go from there. But in this case, the whole wishing conceit, I think torpedoes the entire movie, because they haven't figured out, they didn't sit down, and this happens a lot. It's happening more and more and more and more and more. I see it in more and more different things. You need to sit down and figure out how your wishes work and figure out the mechanics behind that, because if you're wishing to have a sovereign state restored to glory in the Middle East and 1,000-foot walls suddenly appear, well, there's a lot of questions that come about because of that. And if the results, like the wishing for more nuclear weapons and launching your nuclear weapons, I mean, once missiles are in the air, you can just wish them away, or as a result of all the wishes being turned around, when I renounce, do you think everybody on the planet Earth, after getting a great speech from Diana, is going to renounce their wishes? Everybody all at once just because she said so? I don't know. So ultimately, the point that I wanted to make is, let's bring it back down to reality in telling a science fiction, fantasy, or horror story. How does the authors most effectively do this? And we have examples of that all around us. J.R.R. Tolkien, look at what he did. Look at how George R.R. Martin, I mean, I know he hasn't finished The Song of Ice and Fire yet, but look at how much detail he goes into everything that happens in Westeros. I mean, Dune. Frank Herbert's Dune, the first 6 novels, well, his 6 novels, in Dune, Dune Messiah, Children of Dune, God Emperor of Dune, Heretics of Dune, and Chapter House Dune, he lays it all out. You don't sit there and go, wait a minute, Frank, I don't believe this. No, you believe everything because he explains it all, and it all is rooted in some kind of reality in the here and now. But to turn Wonder Woman and make that story work on a magical fantasy conceit, I think went too far. And I think made the movie, to me, a nonsensical mess that I couldn't follow, because Barbara Minerva, even then, the mechanics of her wish, she just wants to be a self-confident. I mean, we're asked to believe that she turns into a villainess or somebody because why? Have you fundamentally changed her nature? I mean, it was just because that's where the movie wanted to take you. But I think it would have been really more interesting, again, if Wonder Woman herself, and you concentrated on what it was that she'd done for herself. And also the idea that Steve Trevor comes back and she just doesn't immediately go, well, this is wrong. I don't know. Something has happened here that it's an abomination. But she's like, no, man, you're back. I know you're dead, but it's been 60 plus years later and you're here. So let's get a little something going on first of all. Nah, we'll fix that. We'll figure it out later. And it's just, I think it's bad science fiction. It's bad fantasy. It's bad horror. It's bad superhero storytelling. And I think it ultimately, at the end of the day, leaves us imagination connoisseurs. Now, I'm not saying you can't love Wonder Woman 84, but I just think that it's a complete mess of gobbledygook, much like much of Star Trek Discovery is. And I think it's because when you're dealing with these things, more than ever, you have to give an audience an understanding of what it is they're supposed to understand. And if you make it, well, anything goes, we're living in a world where magic can happen. Well, what about, we already saw, okay, Ares and all that. We understand there's gods among men walking the earth and trying to pit man against man and all that. But the fact that Wonder Woman took place during World War I, during the trench warfare of the war to end all wars, and the idea that Wonder Woman left to come to the world of man during this particular time gave that movie a particular resonance. It very much grounded the fact that the understanding that man is susceptible to the whims of the gods. And we already saw, and it worked. And you could say the CG battle at the end was too much, but there was a very realness to what was going on in Wonder Woman 84. I mean, in the original Wonder Woman. In Wonder Woman 84, even the 80s feels like the most cliched, half-baked. I mean, literally, let's go to a mall and let's see every 80s cliche in the first 7 seconds of being there. And by the way, why would an artifact like this even be at I understand, a diamond distributor that's also the front? I mean, imagine that. You're bringing in trafficked antiquities and you're bringing them into a mall. I mean, aren't there standalone stores that might be easier to deal with? What do? Bring in your stolen antiquities in the loading dock and bring them up to the store that's in the middle of the mall? Like, how do you get all these antiquities in there? It's just, I know, it's probably silly, but how do you make me believe, man? I didn't believe one iota of Wonder Woman 1984. I like the beginning, but the rest of it, it was so disappointing. Because as the Viceroy of Verisimilitude, I watched this and I thought to myself, I don't believe 1 ounce of this movie. And I really wanted to. I really wanted to. Anyway, that's what I wanted to talk about today. And Gal Gadot just keeps getting better as Wonder Woman and all of that. I love seeing Robin Wright come back. But boy, was this movie, I think, a monumental disappointment to me. Because I very much like the first Wonder Woman. I was monumentally disappointed in this film because I didn't believe any of it. And that bummed me out. As all of you know, I have letters today to read. And let's see where we are at with the letters. This one comes from Andrea Valentova. And if memory serves, I don't remember getting a letter from Andrea Valentova, but what a great name, Andrea Valentova. Hello, Rob and the Post-Geek Singularity members. I'm a longtime fan and listener from the Czech Republic, and I decided to write to you about my experience with Star Trek. Also, please pardon my English, as it's not my first language. Born in 1980, I am the child of communist Czechoslovakia. Kind of like General Orlov. We have 40 armored tank divisions in Czechoslovakia. But then the Velvet Revolution happened in 1989, and Western culture started to come to our small country. Along also with it, Star Trek. I was a teenager in the glorious 90s, and it shaped my life forever. I can write about how it was at that time with Star Trek TV shows and movies coming to our TV channels and cinemas, but that would be separate and a long letter, perhaps for another time. This time, I have one Star Trek topic I want to talk about and haven't heard anyone mention it on this show, or I missed it. You see, I've also been a gamer my whole life, but I only played games that had story that intrigued me. After Enterprise ended, there was a long period without any new Star Trek TV show or movie, and this is where Star Trek Online comes in, my topic for this letter. Yes, I know, games and specifically MMORPGs are not for everyone, but hear me out. I've started to play this game right around its 3rd anniversary. Its 11th is coming this spring. I am playing this game to this day, every day. There's also a community and therefore connection with other like-minded people. But most importantly, there is the story. If you look past the leveling and grinding, you have missions with overarching story that to me is fantastic. And I wished many times we could get this instead of Picard or Discovery as a TV show. Yep, I'm not a fan of either. To me, this is my canonical Star Trek, continuing where Nemesis ended the Prime storyline. Of course, it is awesome, but you can captain your own ship, visit Starfleet Academy, Space Dock, Vulcan, Kronos, Deep Space Nine, even walk on the insides of the Dyson Sphere. You can fight against the Tal Shiar and help rebuild newly established Romulan republics based on Spock's teachings, or visit Grethor as a brave Klingon warrior. But the most important thing to me is that this world and its story feels like the Star Trek of the Prime universe. To be completely fair, there is also content about the Kelvin universe, the Mirror universe, and even from Discovery, but that's not part of the main overarching storyline I mentioned. I'm not expecting you to just take my word for it, or to go play the game to experience it for yourself. I can write more about the main storyline, but that would be another long letter. Let me just give you a few hints. The story starts in the year 2409, 30 years after Nemesis, so right there, you're going further in the time. The Hobus supernova destroyed the Romulan Empire, and the remnants are fighting for survival, either under oppressive rule of Empress Sela or hoping for a better future under Datan, the boy from Unification, and his republic. Federation and Klingon Empire are at war again, but what started it, you may wonder? Agents of species 8472, masked as different species of our galaxy, as seen in the Voyager episode In the Flesh, have infiltrated several core governments. What is their agenda, and what are the demons of air and darkness, and how do they plan to retake the galaxy? Well, as a player, you will discover answers to all of these questions and be part of some epic battles. What will end the war? Spoiler alert, one simple act of kindness. I rest my case, Andrea. Well, thanks a lot about that. Thanks for writing in, Andrea, all the way from the Czech Republic. I very much appreciate that. Love that people write in from foreign countries, of course. Everyone is welcome here. Every sentient being from across these 28 known galaxies. Everyone is welcome, so please stay. I've heard Star Trek Online does a great canonical job of tying it into what has come before, and a much better job than, say, what's going on with Star Trek Discovery or Picard. But remember, the people working on Star Trek Discovery and Picard, they have no incentive to go back into all of this canonical work and try and caress everything in. They have to make everything their own. And I get that. It's kind of a bummer, but they do. And what can you do? But yeah, what a great letter. I can't, man. I have so little time the way it is. If I were to jump into getting into Star Trek Online, and people keep telling me that I should, I can see myself getting lost in it. I really can. Enterprise HNCC 1701H is here. Disciple of Diversity, greetings. I heard you read a letter regarding social justice warriors and how Star Trek was a future where they had won. I feel like people who say they don't understand what social justice warriors are, and maybe that is because the right has overused the terminology. If anything, Star Trek is or was Martin Luther King's version of the future. I have seen social justice warriors who hate Martin Luther King. Social justice warriors are not simply activists who fight for social justice. Most people believe in social justice, but students of history know that fascism in the 1930s was promoted in the States under the guise of social justice. There is nuance to be had whether or not social justice in one's platform makes the person or group worthy of praise. That is why, after social justice warriors and moral relativism arrived on the scene, my own moral convictions were shaken. After all, if people who preached social justice could be so vile and amoral, then what was the nature of morality? I look for universal truths to live by, maxims, if you will. My question was, is there such a thing as objective morality? Something which all creeds believe in and makes up the core of morality itself. By that I mean that which atheist and theist, anarchist and fascist, capitalist and socialist alike agree on what makes a good person. More on that in a bit. In regards to winning, they can never win. The purpose of a movement is that it ends once its goals have been achieved. But once a movement becomes an ideology, it needs dragons to fight against on a continuous basis. Notice the framing of how they say anti-racist literature rather than how to build a better tomorrow literature. I have nothing against negativity, but I want that negativity to bring about positive change and not condemn me to wallow in misery for the rest of my life. I don't know how familiar you are with D&D, but I liken social justice warriors to colorblind dragon slayers who cannot tell the difference between a gold dragon and a red dragon. In the article that you linked, the social justice warriors were protesting their liberal teacher, a black woman who donated to artists in Africa, as someone who had failed to celebrate the work of black women. They lack nuance, which I deem to be a part of objective morality. I have seen a video of a former social justice warrior who told how they swung to the other end of the spectrum and became a neo-Nazi for a while. They often also lack principle, which I deem to be the other part of objective morality. A person whose name I shall not mention made the following demands to make video games better, but two of them in particular stood out to me. No more violence against women in video games, and more female enemies in video games. This is literally doublethink. You could not appease these people if you wanted to, and I aimed to please and not to appease. That same person also lied about a game incentivizing violence against women, when in actuality the game actively penalized such behavior. I think the best way to describe social justice warriors lacking principle is that they are the boy who cried wolf. Why does or did Star Trek manage to unify people with so many different backgrounds and ideologies? In my opinion, that is because Starfleet officers we follow are objectively good people. They are capable of nuance while maintaining their principles. Enterprise HNCC 1701H wrote that. P.S. Hope you had a good Christmas. Hey, man, I am wary of anybody who declares themselves the final arbiter of what is good and what is bad. Because, like you said, everything is sort of relative. I do believe in an objective reality. I believe in an objective moral reality. And that objective moral reality, what I guess would begin with, I don't believe in taking the life of my fellow man. I mean, let's not talk about war, but I think for me personally, as an individual, I believe in the thermodynamic miracle of human life. That the fact that everyone is alive at all is miraculous. There is only one of each human being, one. In the entirety of human existence, there's only been one of you, one of each person. That alone, from a moral standpoint, it says to me that we, human beings, well, living creatures in general, but let's just say human beings because we can recognize how rare we all are. Even though there's 7 billion of us, we're all very unique. Each one of us is different. Each one of us is the product of incredible amounts of chance coming into play. And I do believe that humanity, being that we're here, that it is objectively immoral to take the life of another human being. I believe that. Now, in a society, if you are building a society, if you do take the life of another human being, you have transgressed on, to me, the foundational, morally objective law of the land, which is you can't take another human life. If you do that, that is the worst crime an individual can perpetrate against another individual. That is the worst transgression to that, the very first of, call it objectively moral, thou shalt not kill. You know, and everything sort of goes from there. I think that it's and if you look at how human beings organize ourselves, the 10 Commandments are a pretty good place to start. And so I think that what I find strange about social justice, people that consider themselves social justice warriors, is they've put themselves in a position where they think they know better than you. And my question is always, well, who ceded that authority to you? Why are you now using whatever your perceived authority against me? How are you better than me? And that's where I start to have problems with all of these things. There are a lot of people, and I hate to say it, a lot of people who use social justice as their own bully pulpit. And the question is, I've always asked, why are you better than me? How is it that what you are saying is better than what I'm saying? I mean, I'm more interested in, like we were talking about, objective moral reality. Let's agree on that. But I know a lot of people don't necessarily do that. But interesting letter. Thanks for writing in. I love hearing from you. This next letter comes from Tanner Genest. Tanner. He says, "Hey, Rob, in the Post-Geek Singularity. After listening to your talk about fandom recently, I had a realization that I used to be a toxic fan. A fan who refused to accept something in my own fandom that didn't align with my own views. I would lash out and attempt to force others to align themselves with me. As I've gotten a new perspective, I've begun to realize that sometimes true fandom isn't so easy to describe, and to each person, their fandom means something different. While a bad product can hurt a fandom, it's the fans who keep that love alive and pass it on to others instead of giving up and letting go. I plan to continue my Star Trek journey and sharing it with everyone in the Post-Geek Singularity, and I thank you for allowing me to take this journey with y'all. My love of fandom has been rekindled, and the beacon has been lit. Thank you for your time. Live long and prosper. Hang loose, Hiborik. Well, Hiborik, Tanner, thank you for writing in. I very much, it's like the nicest thing you can say to me. And I think to everyone else, the Post-Geek Singularity. So thank you for that. I very much appreciate that. This comes from Mark Nellist. He says, Dear Robert, I wanted to express my thanks for your content, which gives a humble person as myself a greater and richer understanding of the Trek universe. I sat relaxing, watching Wrath of Khan on Christmas Eve, which you should, which is awesome. Work and international travel and all that stuff pales into insignificance compared to Trek. Oh, I don't know. I always thought people should boldly go in their lives, and the only place we can boldly go is travel into foreign countries, and it's never, I don't think it's ever overall been a bad experience to ever travel around the world. It's only been good. Even when certain things that are bad happen to you, ultimately it's good. Thank you, Robert, for all of your extra content and your guidance. But in the year 2020 on Christmas Eve, I'm watching Wrath of Khan, which should say it all. Warmest regards, Mark Nellist, Viking Lofen. Thank you. I appreciate that. Again, very nice letter. I love hearing that from people. That's very nice. This one comes from Pedro Ferreira. Happy Christmas. I hope you got lots of nice presents. I did. I just wanted to say I tend to be critical of people in charge of current Star Trek on social media, but as it was Christmas, instead of leaving cynical comments on their Twitter posts that don't ultimately help, I decided to offer some critical feedback, some points as to how to improve the franchise and win back the fans. The following was copied into Alex Kurtzman and Michelle Paradise's Twitter pages, not to troll, but because I genuinely care. And here's what he writes. This is what he sent to Alex. This is what Pedro sent to Alex Kurtzman and Michelle Paradise. I know I've been critical in the past, but since it's Christmas, I wanted to offer some constructive criticism and how to unite the fandom back. Some of these could help make you guys popular again. Remastered DS9 and Voyager in proper HD. Yes, it will be expensive and it'll take 4 years per show, but if you have the money to fund 6 different Star Trek shows currently in production, you must have the finances for a project that will provide profit years from now. Remaster the director's edition of Star Trek the Motion Picture. It's long overdue and needs attention. 3. Speaking of remastering, why doesn't CBS remaster or re-release its Star Trek video and PC games? Stuff like Star Trek Borg would look great in HD, and the studio has tons of entertaining Star Trek games to bring back for a new audience. Restart the Stage 9 fan game and make it legit. Either make it something we paid for or let it be the non-profit fan game it was. One of the biggest errors that needs to be corrected since you've been producing Star Trek. Your shows would avoid so much derision amongst fans if you put everything you've produced from Discovery onwards into its own universe. It just doesn't fit into Star Trek from 65 to 2005, and putting it in a different universe allows a different set of rules you can follow. Number 6, if you're willing to spend some money greenlighting new Star Trek shows, why not greenlight some TV shows set in the TNG timeline or the TOS, but with the relevant production values? Have you seen the fan films? They managed to copy the look and storytelling perfectly. None of this is impossible. It can be done. Doing a couple of these will unite fandom back together. Anyway, have a happy Christmas. These are just ideas I submitted to them. Whether they read these posts or already have me on mute, I'm not sure. Notice in no way is any of these points do I say they should cancel Discovery, Picard, etc. I was trying to be fair and inclusive of everyone's needs. Unfortunately, not everyone feels that way. It's said many times without proof, modern Star Trek fans cannot handle any type of criticism, yet today I did get first-hand proof. No more than 5 minutes after posting this, some comic book writer and agent called Tony Lee jumped on my post. Perhaps he's speaking from personal experience, but he made out I was being entitled. I replied, if they did at least 2 of these things, it would help get CBS in good with modern-day franchise detractors. I have faith in CBS. I know they can do it. He seemed to think I spoke for everyone, but I never speak for anyone because I know perfectly well everyone has their own ideas on how something should be good. His reply was also that I'm speaking from a small vocal minority who dislike modern Star Trek, and that the franchise is fine just as it is, meaning that all 6 of the points highlighted above are unnecessary. He doesn't care about Star Trek in HD, Rob. My point with this letter is that even when I provide constructive feedback on the feedback, people like Mr. Lee are quick to defend those in charge and dismiss the feedback. Am I just an annoying person, Rob? Is this feedback really useless? It's not like I'm asking them to change how they write Star Trek because that's their job, not mine. If a gatekeeping twat does exist, this guy certainly seems to fit the bill. For people who claim to be more accepting than our small vocal minority, this guy in particular has a funny way of showing it. Apologies for the bitter letter, but this really annoyed me today. Kind regards, Pedro. Yeah, I find it really weird the way people defend Star Trek, modern Star Trek, the way they do. If you've got a dissenting opinion, they attack you personally, not your opinion. Like if you bring up a legitimate point of concern, like how exactly did the burn happen? What are the mechanics of it all? How do the wishes work in Wonder Woman 84? Like, and what's really interesting, people will say to me, Rob, does it really matter how the wishes work? I mean, they're wishes. Well, it does matter, because when I think the filmmakers don't understand the mechanics of their wishing, that's a problem. You know, you have to ask yourself, okay, well, and I have to say that when I see previous evidence, like I was a big fan of Jeff Johns. I am less a fan of his now, his writing. Not as a person. I don't know him. I only met him once. I've heard stories about him, but I met him once at a dinner, and I had dinner with him at Musso and Frank's with a couple other writers. My friend Jason hooked that up, and this is way before. This is like way before 20 years ago, before he was writing Teen Titans. And to me, Jeff Johns was a huge DC fanboy, and I had already liked a lot of his stuff, and so I haven't had any personal dealings with him except one time, which made me intensely dislike him. But it wasn't based on his writing. It was based on something professionally that he prevented me from doing that I should have been allowed to do. But he prevented me directly, even though I'd had the people involved ready to go. But whatever. But I just don't think that if you were to, or maybe you would, maybe he would know the answer to this, but I just didn't think they figured it out. You know, I was watching Wonder Woman, I'm like, okay, you know, even in the ring, they might not explain where Sadako or Samara are, but there's rules to how the ring, how that works. And they pretty much adhere to those rules, and that's what made it effective. In this movie, it's like, wait a minute, how does this all work? So Pedro Pascal becomes the wishing Brock, but then he can get something. How can he? Anyway. I just want it all to work. And modern Star Trek, it's full of that. Modern Star Trek is full of a bunch of contradictory information that I don't feel that they know how any of it really works. And it's monumentally frustrating. Now let's see what you guys are saying. A lot of stuff. Let's go over and see what you guys are saying. Back to where I was. Where was I? Wow, you guys, there's a lot of you here. My God. Let's go back and see where we're at. Okay, Willow is here. Willow always starts first. Willow Yang sends in a tip and says, I know that the pickings are slim, to put it mildly, but what is your favorite movie of 2020? I'd be curious if people are still doing their top 10 list for the year. Well, there's a lot of movies that come out. Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, which I watched yesterday, definitely at one of my favorite films. I just haven't seen a lot of movies. I'm trying to catch up on them now. There's a lot of, I haven't seen Nomadland, Chloe Zhao's Nomadland. I really want to see Nomadland. I think that'll probably be up on the top list. Mank, maybe, although Mank, not for everyone. But yeah, I haven't seen a lot of the movies yet, and I need to get around to that. That's what I want to do by the end of the year. I'm sure there's about 20 movies that I haven't seen that I really want to catch up with. Yeah, we'll see. GMTC Podcast sent in a super chat and says, hey, Rob, have you watched episode 2 of The Stand? Oh, I have. I thought it was slightly less horrible than episode 1, but still bad enough to be upset as a fan. Look, uh, as I tweeted, basically over the end credits of and maybe they don't even know they did this, but this is so stupid for me. People are gonna be like, "Come on, Rob." Over the end credits of The Stand, episode 2. Well, first of all, let's talk about Larry Underwood. You never hear Larry Underwood sing. They turned him into, he's a black musician who has a drug problem. I'm like, okay. And that to me, it was, I don't understand how you can read The Stand, have a character like Larry Underwood, and make the miniseries, and have him get up on stage and not have him play. You know, the scene is his band is they all flake on him, and he gets in a fight with like a friend of his that accuse him of ripping off his songs. I'm watching this and I'm like, man, you know, when The Stand opens, Larry Underwood has a #1 hit on the radio, "Baby, Can You Dig Your Man?" And I figured that, okay, you've cast a black actor in the role of Larry Underwood. I'm like, that makes sense. That's cool. So what I wanted to hear the song. I wanted to have it, whether it was a hip hop version or whether it was Earth, Wind, and Fire meets, I don't know, Eric B. and Rakim, or Rakim, something like that, or the Wu-Tang Clan meets Santana. I don't know. I just thought I was going to get that song, and I really couldn't stand how Larry Underwood was portrayed. It wasn't the fault of the actor. And, you know, you meet Rita Blakemore, played by Heather Graham, and then, of course, they play, over the end credits, Heather Graham dies, but they play this famous song from Boogie Nights. You know, it's like, wait a minute, are you going to really put that song in The Stand that harks back to Heather Graham's character from Boogie Nights? Is this some meta commentary that you're making? And then, of course, you have 3 guys. One guy shows up and, "I'll offer you $1 million in cash for 15 minutes with Heather Graham." I understand they wanted to establish a threat, but gosh, that just seemed a little weird and out of place. I think the flashback structure doesn't work at all. It doesn't work at all. I find The Stand, after 2 episodes, 2 hours of The Stand, the word inert comes to my mind. I mean, I haven't seen something so long that is as inert as that. Dan V is here. Dan V says, "Hey, Rob, I was the one who sent you the Star Wars Legacy graphic novel." Oh, thank you. I hope you enjoy it. I will. Wonder Woman 84 was a disjointed mess, and the leaks were all true, so I was prepared. I would say that 45 minutes could have been edited out, and Cheetah wasn't needed. Yeah, you know, I think that whole movie could have been about, if I had made it, Wonder Woman would have had her wish, and the world would have started, reality would have started to unfurl. And her and Steve Trevor would have had to stop the world from falling apart. And ultimately, Wonder Woman has to realize is that it's her fault. And you wouldn't need Cheetah, you wouldn't need Maxwell Lord, you wouldn't need any of it. I just thought it was really weird. Keaton Toothman sends in a super chat and says, "Merry Christmas, love you, buddy. Thanks for all you do. We're going to see your work soon." Dan V goes on to say, "I also didn't believe a lot of the movie. The opening scene is well done, but could have been cut, honestly. It felt like a first draft of a script where everything was permitted and nothing was cut. Then I noticed something else about Wonder Woman 84. Many people are saying the film made them cry and it was emotionally impactful, while not discussing the plot. It's great if you're affected by it, but the story and plot do matter, which is what some people are ignoring. I felt that strange when reviewing a film. No spoilers, but I found the mid-credits scene to be overrated, and it's a bit ridiculous with all the clickbait headlines saying how it will or could change the DCEU going forward. There's just so many plot holes in Wonder Woman 84, honestly. Look, I didn't think the movie hung together at all. I thought it was really weird. I think they were trying to actually make a movie that felt like it came out in the 80s, but I don't think it worked. Paul Gilmore says, "Howdy, my fine feathered friend. If it's not too much on the spot for you, name 3 movies you consider perfect or an example of perfect films excluding Free Enterprise." Free Enterprise is definitely not perfect. I've never been happy with that. It needed another rewrite, to be honest, or maybe 2. Movies I think are perfect? Well, when I say they're perfect, I think they hold together perfectly. There's a lot of movies I think are perfect. I think The Godfather is a perfect film. I think Alien is a perfect film. I think Jaws is a perfect film. Raiders of the Lost Ark is probably a perfect movie. I think Lawrence of Arabia is a pretty perfect film. Citizen Kane, pretty much perfect movie. Sunset Boulevard, All About Eve are perfect movies. There's a lot, actually. But yeah, those are a couple examples. Alexander Wilson says, I thought Wonder Woman 84 was fine. It didn't grab me like the first one did. As a person born and raised in Washington, D.C., there was a lot of 2018 D.C. in Wonder Woman 84. I was like, many of the buildings, systems, and structures were not present in 1984 Washington, D.C. Did they note? Did they care? No, they didn't. No, they didn't care. That was the thing. They gave us a weird movie version of 1984 as opposed to a real version of 1984. And it would have been really interesting, like, what was the Reagan Revolution? I would have thought that would have been part of the big, I guess Maxwell Lord was supposed to represent that, but it was weird. I'm going to wait with, Timbula the Spider Monkey says, I'm going to wait with Wonder Woman 84. I don't really care about spoilers. I'm not going to sit in a theater right now with virus cases on the rise in Sydney, and I just can't bring myself to shiver me timbers. I'm not overly concerned about it when I can eventually see it. Yeah. I agree. I wouldn't go to I wouldn't go to a theater in Los Angeles. No way. Dan V says, I forgot to add, Rob, that Wonder Woman 84 didn't even seem like it needed to be set in the 80s, other than the wardrobe scene from the trailer. Compared to First Class, which nailed it as a period superhero piece, it falls far short. I completely agree. It didn't need to be set in the 80s. It didn't. And the interesting things about what was going on with the 80s, they didn't even touch on, which was odd. Johnny Long sends in a super chat and says, Wonder Woman 84 seems like Patty didn't have as much creative control as the first movie. At least it seems that way. We can't assume. Fun, but missing something. Yes, SMITH. Anonymous sends in a tip and says, your point about how Raimi's Spider-Man showed a film version of NYC is exactly how I felt about DC and Wonder Woman 84. DC was the murder capital of America in the 1980s and 90s. DC was grimy, dark, and dangerous. The whole city was too brightly illuminated in Wonder Woman 84. Yeah, it was not. It was a stylized movie version of 1984. Paul in Long Beach sends in a tip and says, Dear Mike Bodden, my 3-word review for Wonder Woman 84 is Christmas drivel, unfortunately. Oh, man. Jeff Yerke sends in a tip and says, hey, Rob, greetings from Mrs. Y and me. Hope you and Mrs. Y had a good holiday. We had a good holiday, complete with turkey, dressing, and cranberry sauce. We regressed to cinema classics. Christmas Eve with Die Hard, and Christmas Day was Godfather 1. Tomorrow night is Coda. Live long and prosper, the Yerk Man. Well, get back to me, Jeff, on what you think about Coda. Dan V sends in a tip and says, since you read it in the review, but the body possession was incredibly stupid and a big mistake to me. The man was unaware. The body was used without his consent. I've seen certain people bringing that up, and it's a bit problematic, and it was a dumb idea. Plus, I don't even understand. So why is it that in Diana's wish, she actually had to possess a real person to get Steve to come back? How did that work? I mean, and who's making these decisions? Again, is the evil god, like, I really think that we needed to see like the evil god in the afterlife going or wherever. Maybe he's still on the top of Mount Olympus. I don't. How did that work? And I know you're supposed to say, Bob, come on, Bob, just go with it. My mom would be like, Bob, who cares? Don't you just enjoy the movie? Well, I can't enjoy the movie because they kept showing me the different mechanics of wish fulfillment, and it was weird. It didn't really work. I'm like, what's going on? So it was a bit problematic. Stub McShave sends in a tip and says, with all the wishing going on, what happens when 2 different wishes contradict each other? Well, Elizabeth said something like that to me. It seems a bit wishy-washy to me. The writers of Wonder Woman 84 should read Sanderson's Laws of Magic that I wrote about to you in a letter almost 2 years ago. I love that letter. I love Sanderson's Laws of Magic. And yes, I mean, it's disappointing. It's really disappointing that, what are the rules of magic? Oh, I don't know. Mr. Mondragon, or is it, I guess Mondragon, one word. I think Avengers Endgame has as many flaws as Wonder Woman 84. Wonder Woman and Avengers Infinity War made me believe in something, but the sequels ruined it. See, I totally disagree with that. I don't think that the Endgame has nearly as many flaws as Wonder Woman 84 does, because it's touching on things that were already previously established in the Marvel Universe. But, again, your mileage may vary. Evan Gerhardt says, hey, Rob, do you remember that time Captain Janeway went hang gliding with Leonardo da Vinci? Absolutely. Just made sure I didn't dream it up. Nope, you didn't dream it up. That was true. That happened. Absolutely it did. Craig Stratton sent in a super chat and said, it's about the wording. Barbara said she wanted to be like Diana. The stone made her like Diana. If you want a specific wish, you need to specify more. I guess so, but she didn't know she was wishing to be like Wonder Woman. But I guess you could say. But then again, now you're making a value judgment. Now you're making a value, like the wishing well is the Terrence Trent D'Arby wishing stone is making a value judgment as to what you wanted. It's now, see, this is my problem, is that whatever wish is happening, it's interpreting what it is you want. Oh, you want your nation to be a sovereign nation? Let me build a wall around it. Well, the wisher didn't say he wanted a wall, but the wishing stone said, let's build a wall. Well, that's a big leap to make. You've now made a leap into architecture, which is different than what the guy asked for. But I guess be careful what you wish for. But again, seemingly that's a choice. There's a wishing. There's every wish had a choice that the wishee, or not the wishee, the Wishmaster. Let's go back to that movie. Wishmaster had a little bit more of a. Well, I have to go back and look, but I think it had more of a respect to wishing well. I don't know, but you might be right, Craig. Paul Gilmore says, I'm still perplexed. When Steve Rogers quantum leaps into that guy, I kept thinking through the whole movie, well, what the fuck happened to the guy he leaped into? Is he in a quantum leap chamber in limbo? Where is he? He obviously exists since Steve's in his body. Yes, and here's the thing. In a great movie, you wouldn't be asking yourself these questions. They would be answered for you. But Wonder Woman 84, it just has one question stacked up on top of another, and by the end of the movie, it suffers. It falls into it collapses under its own weight. Senor Ashish sends in a tip and says, hello. It seems as though what's old is new again when it comes to comic book movies. Melodrama, wit, and colorful costumes, which were negated by the dramatic highbrow elements of Singer and Nolan, are now back in fashion for superhero films. They are. Maybe they're in a different way. They're morphing, which I think is okay. It's just that the storylines need to I still want to believe them. Craig Stratton said, Barbara didn't say make me more confident or make me more outgoing. She said make me like Diana, so it made her like Diana. Well, if it made her like Diana, was she pining away for Steve Trevor? I mean, that would have been interesting. That Barbara Minerva actually dreamed up, it was her who dreamed up Steve Trevor because she was more like Diana. But I would say that Diana she's playing a part. The Diana Prince or whatever, the Diana that is working at the Smithsonian is not really her. So the wishing thing knows her true nature and doesn't know that she's putting on the part of the Diana that works. So that's the thing. Make her more like Diana. Well, Barbara Minerva doesn't know. So in her wish, what she's really wishing for is to be like Diana that she understands and knows. But if then the wishing rock or whatever says, well, what you really don't know her, so but how does the rock know that? So does the wishing thing scan Diana and know what's about her? What Barbara Minerva is asking for is more confidence and to be able to be as put together as Diana is. So the Rock is then examining Diana and because what Barbara Minerva is asking for is not to be an Amazonian. And Barbara Minerva doesn't even know that she's an Amazonian. All Barbara sees is this outwardly thing. So Barbara's wish has nothing to do with her having super strength. So what Barbara's asking for is not that. I mean, unless you say, well, it was a literal interpretation. But how does the wishing thing know? I know it sounds strange, but what Barbara Minerva is wishing for from the bottom of her heart is more confidence and all of that. And yet this device, you're saying, is it's interpreting what Barbara's looking for. I want to be more like Diana. Okay, well, there you go, I guess. But then how come I guess she's more like Diana? The wishing machine doesn't make any... The wishing machine is not looking at Barbara Minerva's wish the way she's casting it, which is odd. Let's see. Dan V says, speaking of Wonder Woman, I would strongly recommend reading Wonder Woman Dead Earth by Daniel Warren Johnson, who wrote and drew it. It's awesome and essentially an Elseworlds where it is post-apocalyptic. I would say it's a very metal story. I'd read that. Paul Gilmore says, it's driving me nuts. What happened to him? Is he in Steve's dead body? I don't know. And here's the question. She knows it's Steve, but is it really Steve or is it that guy? It still looks like that guy walking around. Like, look, I still don't understand how Adira is talking to Gray, her boyfriend, in front of people. How does that work? I don't know. Let's see. Jonathan Rodriguez says, it was bad. I wish I could say it, but you know I work in the industry. I don't want to piss off people and not be hired again. I'm staying off Twitter. You know what? I mean, I don't think, look, I talked to somebody, an industry friend of mine, and it was something that they worked on. I'm like, dude, I thought this was not good. And this person can take it because he's not as creatively vested in it. He's more of a deal maker. But I'm never going to lie to somebody. I've stopped lying to people. You know, if they're friends of mine and I don't dig their movie, I won't usually say anything. But if they ask me, I'm like, I had some problems with it. You know, just like, look, I've got problems with my own movie. You know, I can tell you what my problems are with the things that I've worked on. I think it's possible to like things. There are a lot of things. I enjoyed watching Wonder Woman 84. I would not buy the Blu-ray or the 4K disc. I couldn't get Wonder Woman fast enough in 3D and in 4K. I will not buy Wonder Woman 84 if it comes out. I won't buy it. It will not be in my collection. 200 Watt Studio sends in a super chat and says, does the dude that Diana is stupping know he isn't really Steve, know what is happening? He gave consent to her and Steve to use his bod for sex. Bruh, I don't know. It's so weird. It was so weird. That was not made clear to me at all. They spun around him a couple times and he was that dude. Like, we never saw what he looked like looking in the mirror. It was so weird. And apparently Steve knew that he came. He was like, well, I basically was in heaven and you pulled me out of it. Jonathan Rose says, I haven't seen, and by the way, there's a whole extra added element there. So if Steve is living in the afterlife and he says wherever he was great and he knows he's there, well, if he knows he's there and he comes out, and he knows he's back, there's all kinds of wackiness. It's bizarre. Jonathan Rose says, I haven't seen the film, but sounds like religion. Doesn't make sense. It must be all about faith. Yeah, it wasn't all about faith because all this stuff was real. Which is weird. Anthony Gonzalez. Hello, Anthony. I also wanted to like Wonder Woman 84. Speaking of 80s stories, say what you will, but I enjoyed X-Men Apocalypse even more so, set in the same period. Tell your pal Brian I wanted more scenes of the Young Mutants, and he should have kept his mall scene. You know what? He should have kept the mall scene. I love the mall scene. I don't know why he cut it. Hitchcock is the GOAT. Sends in a tip and says, near the end, she learns a new ability I realized was in the comics, but I was wondering to myself, why didn't she use it in our current timeline if she learned it in 84? I feared she'd wink at us while circling the Earth before the rolling end credits. Phew. I don't know. I think this was a reboot. of Wonder Woman. You know, they wanted to move away, even though Zack and Debbie Snyder were producers on this. They wanted to move away from that version, even though we're about to see it in the Snyder cut. It's weird. I know. Bob Quall sends in a tip and says, for me, a lot of Marvel films expose their logic flaws more and more with repeated viewings because the casting of the characters is so strong. I still like these films, but less than I used to. Well, every time there's more, I think that's true. Rob, I rewatched, Brendan Sheehy is here and says, Rob, I rewatched Black Panther over Christmas, and I have to say that the part in South Korea is one of the best in the MCU. Busan looks amazing. It oozes style and panache, and the car chase is badass. It actually puts modern Bond to shame as a spy caper sequence. I agree. I love that scene. I think it's great. Evan Newman became a member. Jeffrey Moy became a member, and the Little Trekkie became a member. Well, thank you very much. Peter Cunnington sent in a super chat and says, what about taking the life of animals? I'm vegan. Hey, Peter, I have said more often than not, I think one day human beings are going to realize one of the greatest crimes that we have perpetrated against the world is our cavalier disregard of animals and the way we have treated them. I am not vegan, and I'm a meat lover, but I am also an animal lover as well, and I don't, I know it's a weird thing. But I do think that there's a way we can. I'm not a big fan of factory farming or anything like that, and I think like native indigenous peoples that would some tribes that would take. It was like an Avatar, to put it in science fiction fantasy terms. When they took a life, they respected that life. The Na'vi would respect that life and understood what they did. Jason S. Oh, I can't wait to answer Chris Parker's question. Jason S. says, I find it troubling that they decided to turn Wonder Woman into a rapist. Wonder Woman had sex with an unconscious body that was possessed by a spirit who looked like Chris Pine to the audience. Should a rapist superhero be a role model for children? Well, I know. I know. It was very weird. It was very weird, and I don't know what to say. I don't know. It's really tough. It's really tough. It's so weird. But yeah, a rapist, I don't know about that. I wouldn't, because it seemed consensual between the spirit of Steve Rogers and Gal Gadot, but who knows? Chris Parker says, do we think it a little odd that Hans Zimmer would use someone else's music in the flying scene? Oh my God. Okay. When I was watching this movie, suddenly I'm thinking, okay, Hans Zimmer scored this film, but right now we are totally using John Murphy's great piece of music from the score from Danny Boyle's Sunshine. It's an amazing piece of music that's been used so many places. And Hans Zimmer, now I don't know if Hans Zimmer will admit this or say he did this. It is the piece. He's actually, I didn't look in the credits. I got to go back and look in the credits. It is John Murphy's piece from Sunshine. And I'm willing to bet dollars to donuts that when you're making movies, when they're being edited, you do what's called temp tracking them. Obviously, that your original score hasn't been written, so you use music from other movies and you temp track scenes. Clearly, the editor put that piece of music in the movie. And Hans Zimmer either just blatantly copied it, or he will admit that, yeah, this is John Murphy's piece of music from Sunshine. It was, so Chris, yeah. It was odd. I don't know if he gets credit. There better be credit in the end titles, because it's a lift from that score. I mean, it's not like James Horner, who ripped off from himself, but this was John Murphy's music. Jonathan Rodriguez says, I don't like it when they call us Latinx or Latinx, like we're X-Men or something. In Spanish, it's very insulting. Latino X Latin is both male and female. Look, I have to tell you, I have never heard anybody of Latin descent say that they like the term Latinx or Latin however you pronounce it. I haven't heard one. And Jonathan, you just reiterate that to me. So yeah. Senor Ashish says, one of two. Let's see, Senor Ashish. I don't see. Did I get you before? Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. Let me go back and start from the beginning. Senor Ashish says, hello. It seems as though what's old is new again when it comes to comic book movies. Melodrama, wit, and colorful costumes, which were negated by the dramatic highbrow elements of Singer and Nolan, are now back in fashion for superhero films. Now let me jump up to where you are here. Sorry, not sure of the second part. Jenkins has a deep reverence for Christopher Reeve's era of Superman films and for good or ill that shows in Wonder Woman 84, very reminiscent of Lester's Superman 2. Look, I agree with you. But I think it just the goofiness, it didn't work. I don't think it held together. Oh, Federico Della Casa is here. I love that name. Dear Rob, I was raised by very lefties, but I still remember when in the 70s here in Italy, red terrorists took people's life, but no criticism by the same left. Yeah, you guys had some craziness. Franco in Spain, the leftists in Italy, craziness. Yeah, I know, it's weird. Sometimes I feel there's people that I know that they could take my life and they wouldn't think twice about it, based on what they think I think. Who knows? Richard is here. Richard says, remember when the industry looked at Enterprise like it was the saddest thing on earth? What's with the agent mentioned in that letter and Hollywood in general defending Discovery? Is Discovery a Ponzi scheme? We'll never know. It is a Ponzi scheme. It seems like one to me. Look, everybody that's working in Hollywood, God bless them. Everybody that is working in Hollywood. I do not begrudge anyone who gets jobs. It's really hard to work in Hollywood. But what I find so frustrating about Star Trek Discovery, I have books, reference books. I have hundreds of books on Star Trek. What it is, why it's popular, and all of the incredible artwork and the imagining that was already done. To me, working on a Star Trek show, if you're working on a Star Trek show, so much of the world building has already been done for you. You can get reference materials and be like, okay, here's this era. Get the Star Trek Encyclopedia, the giant how many TV shows that you could possibly work on have as much reference material as Star Trek? The answer to that is zero. So if you work on Star Trek, you've got all this amazing material to draw from. And yet, since 2009, they're like, fuck all that. We're not going to work on that. We're going to make Star Trek our own. We're going to make Star Trek more like Star Wars, more like Top Gun, more like this, more like that. Why should we make Star Trek like it has been? We're going to make it ours. It's going to be our Star Trek. I don't get it. I don't understand. But yet, let's set Discovery in the same, because Brian Fuller wanted it to be set concurrently with the original series. So when they kicked him out, and then Alex Kurtzman basically took over, they kept the idea without any understanding of why Brian Fuller wanted to put it there in the first place. Why did Brian Fuller wanted to set it there in the first place? By the way, Brian Singer and Brian Fuller did work together on Mockingbird Lane. So anyway, and I know them both. But that was the thing. They got rid of Brian Fuller, but because 150 pages of outlines and scripts had already been written in the first two episodes, they just kept all that and bastardized it. It was weird. So yeah, Richard, it's a bizarre thing. We're living in bizarre times. Jonathan Rodriguez says the Russos mess up Back to the Future 4 with me. The Russos are they trying to do Back to the Future 4? I hope not. That would be bad. Plethora 1C says, I just didn't understand the ending of Wonder Woman 84. What was holding Diana back in the end when she confronted Maxwell Lord? How could she talk to everyone? Hey, who knows? She had lassoed him with the Amazonian lasso of truth. He was in this new communications facility and broadcasting to the world. Like, who knows? I don't even know. It's just bizarre. Dan Mitchell sent in a super chat and says, Wonder Woman 84 sucked. I now have great concerns with Patty Jenkins' role in Star Wars. We don't need any more poor storytelling in Star Wars. Well, I would say that Patty Jenkins, look, I love Wonder Woman. I love Monster. So for me, I didn't dig Wonder Woman 84. That's okay. I mean, I'll give her the benefit of the doubt. She's batting just under 70% with me. So there you go. Cinema Gulp says, hey, Rob, my favorite film to watch once I'm drunk on Christmas Day is The Ice Harvest. Well, I've seen The Ice Storm by Ong Lee. I haven't seen The Ice Harvest. I've never seen it. But let's see. The Ice, let me see what Ice, H-R-V-E-S-T film. It's Harold Ramis, written by Richard Russo and Robert Benton. Wow. I don't know it, but there you go. I could see that being a Christmas Day film. Wow, I'd see that. Why not? I haven't seen it. Now I want to see it. Alexander Wilson says, I was listening to Michael Franzese discuss The Sopranos. He said the show portrayed how destructive the life of the mafia is to people. He had a made guy and his brother who was made, who had to kill their father, a made guy too. The father was fooling with another man's wife and daughter and had to go. The son could not enter his house alone. Somebody had to already be there for him to enter the house. He said every time he went into his house alone, he was haunted by dad's ghost. Yeah, well, I think that's exactly right. Richard says, speaking of verisimilitude, why did they only fire one nuclear missile at the alien ship in Independence Day? Why didn't they test different yields? Why didn't they detonate many at once? Why didn't other nations fire them repeatedly in desperation? Why didn't the threat of nuclear fallout from human desperation emerge as another threat in the second act? It's not like the alien shield protected everything. Alien fighters could be disabled by sufficient kinetic force. So why wasn't this a factor in the plans against the aliens? Why couldn't the aliens read Morse code when not only could they understand English, but likely hacked undetected into human satellites? C# is easy, but Morse code's a mystery? Why didn't an advanced alien race with logistics that spans tens of motherships and millions of fighters note the convenience of one of their fighters missing for 60 years, appearing suddenly in their war against the humans? If the alien weapon explodes prematurely, something physically cuts into the beam, why didn't they try that before? Could the alien shield absorb the explosion so close to the discharge? Did the shield extend over the beam? Why did the humans wait for a week before uniting against the aliens? Richard, these are all very good questions, and I don't know the answer. Although, you know what? I overlook it when I watch it. Stubble McShave says, the wishes seem to be like in the joke about the guy who wanted his dong to be bigger and wished for his schlong to reach the floor. I guess most here know the punchline to the joke. Yeah, it's not good. It's not good. Yeah. I mean, back to, like, Independence Day, there's a lot of things they could have tried, but I would say it happened so fast. It happened so fast that they didn't know what to do. So that's what I just chalk it up for. They've only had mere days. The aliens show up. They're there for a little while. They don't know what's going on. Everything's crazy. And it goes from there. Alexander Wilson says, he said that guy was supposedly haunted by his father's ghost for over 30 years. He said the mafia basically mentally destroyed that guy and how it damages its own members. Franzese is a great storyteller. Or Frenzy? I would like to hear that. I got to hear that. I love that. Richard said, I read the Wikipedia synopsis for the latest Discovery episode. The whole child's brain causing physical consequences in the real world is a neat trope, and the USS Discovery is captured at the end. Is there something awful I missed? I haven't watched it yet. Well, I mean, if you really believe that a child's brain can cause physical consequences across a galaxy that spans thousands of light years, more power to you. I just think it's utterly ridiculous, and it made no sense at all. It's awful. And the fact that the villain apparently can now travel at will just because they needed her to. Oh, no, she's using these transwarp conduits. Oh, okay. How did she know where the Discovery was going? They have a mole in Starfleet? Who knows? Craig Stratton says, my point is more, you need to be careful how you wish. That's right. The more specific your wish, the harder it is to go wrong. I wish $1 million and you get $1 million. However, the next day the tax man turns up. Wish for $1 million after tax deductions. Absolutely. I totally agree with that. Michael Preston became a member. Thanks, Michael. Johnny Long said, well, you told my dad Merry Christmas. Haha, I emailed you the video. Think you'll appreciate it. Thanks, Rob. Well, Johnny Long, I want to say Merry Christmas to you, too. Thanks for sending. 200 Watt Studio sends in a super chat and says, more interesting and a moral dilemma for Diana would be if she made her wish for Steve to come back, but in return, another unknown man would be killed. I agree. They could have done a million different things that would have been more interesting, but they went with some weird body possession thing. Why? I don't know. Michael Preston sends in a super chat and says, even the Infinity Gauntlet was explained, and Maxwell Lord is more like Kingpin, not likable, and he's irredeemable. Yeah, I wasn't a big fan. Didn't dig it. Didn't dig it. Patty is going to kill it under Disney's wing. I see what you did there. I hope so. I think it'd be great. Plethora1C says, Rob, you should do a video with Red Letter Media. You both are my go-to for Star Trek reviews. Oh, well, thank you. Of course, I love Red Letter Media. If they ever asked me, I would totally do it. I love those guys. I think they're great. Well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, gentle beings, people from across these 28 known galaxies, I want to thank you all for participating in this chat. I'll be curious to hear what you think of Wonder Woman, and I'd be curious. Gaiman D sends in a super chat and says, also, the problem with showing everyone in the world is able to wish is that they're trying to make us believe that every single person in the world has a unique wish. Also, if even one person thinks the world should end, then what? Oh, I think that's a great point. I mean, Elizabeth and I were talking about that. What do? Does one wish trump another wish? I don't know. And you're absolutely right about that. And I think it's a very important point to make. Do wishes trump other wishes? I don't know. I think they probably would. It's very weird. I mean, with millions of people wishing things, you don't think there's people wishing broad strokes? Like I would have said, I wish we were invaded by aliens. Well, then what? I don't know. But I want to thank everybody for being here. Thank everybody for the conversation. I very much appreciate it. For those of you who have become members, thank you very much. And the Post-Geek Singularity is celebrating the first Intergalactic Imagination Connoisseurs Film Festival. There's going to be movies going up. We're going to finally get all of them up in the next coming week. And then also there's more shows. Let's Get Physical Media. Tomorrow with Dieter Bastian, we're going to be discussing our favorite releases of the year. And then we're going to wrap that up for the end of the year until next year, until we start getting some more. We'll catch up. We'll start getting more physical media releases. And, so I want to thank you all for supporting the channel via super chats and memberships and tips and all that, and questions and letters. I got more letters to read. I will be back, in fact, tomorrow. We'll have a Let's Get Physical Media episode tomorrow. We were supposed to do Tenet tonight. I think I'm going to move that till tomorrow, only because it's getting late, and Elizabeth and I have yet to watch Tenet. So I'm going to move our Tenet show until tomorrow. So that should be fun, and I can't wait. I've got Tenet right here, and I can't wait to finally watch it. I have not watched it. Can you believe it? I'm going to watch it now, and it's going to be fun. So anyway, thanks for being here. Very much appreciate it. And remember, we do have Az from Heel vs. Babyface and Justin from Justin's Collection and I doing the second episode of Fully Articulated at noon on Wednesday. I'll be back on the John Campea Show on Monday and Tuesday, and then we're off. Well, at least I'm off for the rest of the year. And I'll be here having a good time up until then. We'll still be doing shows every day. So thanks very much for being here. And remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I say, have a better day. And I do mean that.